My boss's daughter married into our family the summer I turned 30. And 4 years later, my own wife waited until my birthday dinner to slide divorce papers across the table and tell me, before I'd even opened the folder, that the company would keep paying her every month. Obviously, that part wasn't up for discussion. She set it down next to the plate of food I'd cooked, because I always cooked on my own birthday. It relaxed me more than a restaurant did. And she told me to read it while she finished her wine. Her name was Daphne. She didn't lower her voice. While I sat there staring at a folder with her signature already on the last page, my phone buzzed face up on the table, and it was a payment request from her for that month's household share, the same one she sent every 30 days, even though every dollar in our life came out of accounts I funded. She'd timed it without meaning to. The divorce and the invoice arrived in the same breath. I opened the folder. Everything was filled in. On the signature line, there was a small handwritten note in the margin that said, "Initials here too, .gex," with the kind of casual shorthand you'd use on a permission slip. I looked up and she was scrolling, half watching a show on her tablet propped against the salt. She said she needed more than I could give her. She said she'd outgrown the marriage. She said she'd been feeling this way for a long time and the decision was made, and she'd already talked to a lawyer. Then she said the part that emptied the room of air. She said she expected to keep drawing her monthly salary from my business, $4,200 a month, plus the company card, because she had helped build the brand, and it would be unfair to cut her off just because we weren't married anymore. I said, no problem. That was my answer to almost everything Daphne wanted. She wanted to stop working 2 years in because the front desk job at the dental clinic was killing her spirit. No problem. She wanted a title at my company so she'd have something to say at parties. No problem. She wanted the card, the salary, the new kitchen, the second redo of the kitchen. No problem. I said it because I thought that was what a husband did. I thought love meant clearing the road in front of someone so they never had to feel a single bump. I thought we'd meet in the middle eventually. We never met in the middle. I walked the whole way to her side every time, and she stayed exactly where she stood and called it partnership. Because the IRS scares me more than my ex-wife ever could. I built the company out of one used van, heating and cooling, residential, then commercial once I had 3 trucks and a real crew. I worked Saturdays for 9 years straight. I gave Daphne a marketing role that mostly meant she posted a photo of a job site maybe once a month and drew a salary larger than 2 of my actual technicians. She used the company card for lunches, for a wardrobe for client meetings she never had, for a $400 online course on building a personal brand that produced one half-finished logo. She had projects, so many projects. What she didn't have was a single client, a single dollar earned, or any interest in earning one, because I'd made her life so soft that work became a thing other people did. I asked her why. She put the tablet down for the first time and listed the reasons like she'd practiced them in the car. She said I worked too much. She said I'd gotten dull. She said I never took her anywhere worth posting. She said I'd let myself slide, even though I was the same man who'd been hauling compressors up ladders for a decade while she slept until 10. She said she deserved a bigger life. The life she was describing was the one I paid for, and she still believed she deserved more of it, from someone else, while keeping the part that came from me. I asked how she planned to support herself. She tilted her head like I'd asked something rude. She said, "That's what the salary's for." She said she'd gotten used to a certain standard, and it would be cruel of me to change it. I told her I needed to read everything before I signed. She shrugged, took her glass to the couch, and turned the volume up. I called Theo from the garage that night. He's an electrician I've subcontracted with since the van days, and he'd survived his own ugly split 4 years back. He's the one person who tells me the truth and then shuts up instead of trying to fix it. I told him all of it. The folder, the note in the margin, the 4,200, the "I've outgrown the marriage." The payment request buzzing at the exact same second. He let me finish. He was quiet a long time. Then he asked one question. He said, "Whose name is the company in?" It was in mine. I'd formed it 18 months before I ever met Daphne. The trucks, the lease on the shop, the bank line, the insurance, all of it under my name and my EIN. Her role had no contract, no equity, nothing in writing but a payroll entry I set up myself and could end myself. I'd kept clean books for 9 years, B. I called a divorce attorney in the morning. She walked me through it plainly. Because Daphne had voluntarily left her job, had a degree, had no children, and no medical condition keeping her from work, a judge was unlikely to hand her long-term support, especially at 36. The business was premarital and solely owned, and her payroll listing without any documented contribution wasn't ownership. It was a salary I was free to stop. The kitchen, the cars, the joint savings, those would get split, but the thing she actually wanted, the monthly check forever, she had almost no claim to. So I gave Daphne exactly what she'd asked for, a divorce. I signed it. What I did not sign was a promise to fund her for life. My attorney sent back terms with no salary, no card, and the business untouched. When the response reached her lawyer, Daphne called me from her mother's place, where she'd moved that week while telling everyone she was the one walking away. She was furious. She said I'd blindsided her. That was her word. The woman who handed me papers across my own birthday cake said I'd blindsided her. She said her version had the salary and a buyout written in, and what came back had none of it. She said I was being vindictive. I said I was being precise. She'd asked for a divorce. She never said the terms were hers to keep. She just assumed they were because every term of our marriage had been hers for years, and she had no reason to think the ending would break the pattern. She said this wasn't finished. She said 4 years had to be worth something. I said it was worth a divorce, which she was getting, and that my attorney would handle everything from here. Then I hung up. I didn't speak to her directly for about 3 months. That's when I learned who I'd married. The first thing Daphne did was call everyone, not to say we were divorcing, but to preload her version of why. In her telling, I'd turned cold. I was controlling. I was punishing her for wanting more out of life. She told her friends, her family, the woman who did her nails, my own crew's wives. She set the story before I knew there was a story to argue with. I found out because people stopped asking how I was and started asking why I was being so harsh, why I wouldn't just let her keep her position, whether it was true I was trying to strip her of everything after she'd given me the best years of her life. That phrase came up again and again, the best years of her life, like a line she'd been handed, as if brunch on my dime had been some sacrifice she'd made for me. Her mother, Patricia, called 2 days later. She'd always treated me like a fixture in the house, something useful in the corner. She said Daphne was destroyed. She said I was discarding a woman who'd given me her best years. I asked her what specifically Daphne had given me. She said companionship. I told her my dog gave me companionship. My dog also didn't work, and at least my dog seemed glad I came home. She hung up. I know how that sounds. But I'd spent 4 years as a man who accepted everything and asked nothing, and that man died at a birthday dinner between the candles and the unpaid invoice. I wasn't heartbroken. I was awake for the first time in years. There's a difference. Then her best friend Bree called. The one who'd been on every trip and every spa day I quietly funded. She told me I was making a mistake. She said Daphne had options, that there were men interested, like that was a threat, like I was supposed to panic and hand over the salary to keep her. I told Bree those men were welcome to her, and I hoped they had deep accounts because she ran expensive. Bree called me cruel. I told her I was a guy who'd spent 9 years up on roofs in July so his wife could take a brand building course that built nothing. That's not cruel. That's tired. The proceedings got serious a month later. Daphne hired her own attorney, paid for by her mother because Daphne had no money. 4 years of $4,200 a month is just over $200,000 in spending alone, not counting the card and the rest, and she'd saved none of it. She'd come into the marriage with a job and a small account and left with neither, having treated my income like weather, something that simply arrived. Her lawyer argued she'd grown accustomed to a standard of living my company enabled. My attorney laid out the timeline: voluntary exit from work, a degree, no kids, no condition, a business form before we met, payroll records showing a salary going out with 0 revenue, or documented work coming back. The judge asked Daphne directly why she hadn't worked in 4 years. Her lawyer tried to call it a joint decision. My attorney produced the text where Daphne told me she was done working, and my one-word reply, no problem. Then 5 more texts over the years where I'd asked if she'd thought about going back, each one ignored or deflected. The judge read those for a long time. He ordered 4 months of transitional support at $1,200 a month, a fraction of what she demanded, to give her time to find a job. He left the business entirely mine. He split the joint savings, which held about $31,000, down the middle, and gave her the paid-off car she drove. She cried in the courtroom, not quietly. Her mother rubbed her back and her lawyer studied his shoes. I sat there thinking about the note in the margin, the Tia X, and how sure she'd been at that dinner that she could end a marriage and keep the paycheck. She wasn't crying over me. She was crying over the number. Theo came by that weekend with a 6-pack and we sat in the back of the shop. He asked how I felt. I said it was like someone had finally turned the noise down. He said the first month is strange, the second is quiet, and around the third you start remembering who you were before you got folded into somebody else's life. He was right. I started noticing things. I noticed time. I'd come home and nobody needed me to approve a purchase or listen to a grievance about a yoga teacher or a brunch spot that had changed its menu. I noticed the money. I pulled the books one night, because I can't help myself, and added up 4 years of salary, card charges, the kitchen done twice, the trips, the courses that produced nothing. It came to just under $300,000 routed to a woman who'd called me dull while I worked Saturdays. I didn't want it back. I wanted to understand how I'd let it happen. The answer was simple. I loved her, and love made me generous in ways I never bothered to measure until the generosity was the only thing the marriage was standing on. The options turned out to be real. About 4 months out, I heard Daphne was seeing a man named Wes who flipped houses and drove something with Falcon doors and took her to places I'd never had time to go. It lasted maybe 10 weeks. I heard it ended because Wes expected her to cover her own half sometimes, and she found that insulting. I didn't laugh, but I understood it completely. She'd never wanted a partner. She wanted a provider with no expectations and an exit door. Wes figured that out in 10 weeks. It took me 4 years. Around the same time the support ran out, she got a job, front desk at a property management office, because her mother's patience had thinned to nothing. Patricia called me one last time to ask if I'd keep the payments going voluntarily, said Daphne was struggling, said re-entry was hard. I told her I'd spent 9 years on rooftops, so her daughter could take a branding course and she could manage a job application. Patricia said I'd become cold. I said I'd become accurate. That's the recurring thing about all of it. Everyone around Daphne mistook her discomfort for injustice. She wasn't being mistreated. She was being asked to function. Those aren't the same. 6 months after the papers, she texted me. She said she missed the house. She missed our routine. Maybe we could get coffee. I read it twice, sitting at the same table where she'd served me the folder over my birthday dinner. I thought about the note in the margin, and the payment request buzzing at the same second, and the tilt of her head when I asked how she'd survive. I typed 2 words back. No thanks. She replied with a long message about how I'd changed, how I used to be kind, how the man she married would never have spoken to her this way, and how she hoped I was happy on my own. I didn't answer. She was right about one thing. I had changed. I was no longer the man who'd cook for himself on his birthday and accept a divorce with DX scribbled in the margin as a normal way to end 4 years. I was no longer the man who confused being needed with being loved, because Daphne never loved me. She needed me, and the moment she decided she didn't, she slid a folder across the table and kept scrolling. The company has its best year on record now, partly because payroll dropped by a salary that never earned a cent. I repainted the kitchen she'd redone twice, a color I actually like. I cut my monthly expenses by almost $5,000 just by removing one person, and I felt it come off my shoulders like setting down a compressor at the top of a ladder. At 38, I opened a retirement account for the first time in my life, because for years there was never anything left to put in it. That single fact tells you everything you need to know about who I was married to. I kept the table. I thought about getting rid of it, but I sit there every morning, and it keeps me honest about what it felt like to matter less than a salary line to someone I'd given everything. It doesn't hurt anymore, it just keeps me accurate.